Sorry, I missed if there was an intro or I just start.
You are just going to start.
Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. This is Tiffany Yu. I am a Taiwanese American woman with shoulder length black hair, and I'm wearing a navy blue top. And I'm joining you from actually a hotel room in Pennsylvania. But right now, I am appearing on slides that have a navy color background. So I'm so excited to chat a little bit about rethinking entrepreneurship, creative paths to income. If you're new to me, I'm the author of a book called The Anti-Ableist Manifesto. I'm holding it up. It has an orange cover. And actually, as of today, as we're recording this on October 8th, today marks my 1 year book anniversary. And I'm also the founder and CEO of an organization called Diversability, which is really focused on building disability power and advancing disability leadership. So I know as you registered for this webinar, you were asked the question, when you hear the word entrepreneurship, what comes to mind? I don't know if you have access to the chat here, but feel free to put it in the Q&A if you'd like to add. But here are some of the themes that we saw coming up. We saw a lot of people say, when I hear the word entrepreneurship, I think of business, ownership, freedom, independence. There were also some in here around, I see ones that say hard, uh, let me look, potential, small, flexibility. And if you have additional words you'd like to add as well, Carrie said struggle. So let's go ahead and continue. So a little bit more about me. Again, I'm the CEO and founder of Diversability, author of the Anti-Ableist Manifesto. Previously, I got my start in the corporate world, working at places like Goldman Sachs and Bloomberg, and shifted into full-time entrepreneurship or full-time disability advocacy. I've gotten to serve on the San Francisco Mayor's Disability Council. And two fun facts, one didn't make it onto the slide, but I've traveled over to 50 countries, including climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. I guess maybe I planted a seed when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro because I'm actually part of the Team USA paraclimbing team, and recently have just returned from the World Championships where I was seventh. So today we're going to kind of run through, this is the agenda of what we're going to run through. This is actually structured very similar to my book, where first we'll talk a little bit about the context, the current state of entrepreneurship in the disability community. Me, we, us is the framework we're going to use. I'll start talking about myself, just a little bit more about my own entrepreneur story. Then kind of bring all of us in, talk about kind of what entrepreneurship might look like for you. And then finally, just close by talking about ways we can all support each other on the entrepreneurship journey if that's what you would like to pursue. So let's go ahead and get started. And thank you for adding a couple more words around what entrepreneurship means to you in the little Q&A section: autonomy, challenge, goals. So my entrance into the disability space comes from lived experience. At the age of 9, I was involved in a car accident where my dad was driving. He unfortunately passed away. And I acquired a type of spinal cord injury known as a brachial plexus injury, meaning that one of my arms is paralyzed. I also broke a couple bones in one of my legs, so I was a temporary wheelchair user for about 4 months during my rehabilitation period. And much later, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a type of mental health disability or neurodivergence. I like to call this my first disability origin story. I'm the youngest of four, and as the daughter of Asian immigrants, I think I had internalized, based on my own cultural upbringing, that disability was shameful, that I shouldn't talk about it. And so I believe that a lot of us within the disability community will have what's known as a second disability origin story, which is when a disabled person decides to take pride, ownership, or even at a baseline level, acceptance of a disability identity, even just acknowledging that your disability impacts how you navigate the world. So if you feel like you have reached or are on the journey of approaching your second disability origin story, feel free to put a 1 into the chat or something so I know you are here and we are among community and supporting each other. But there are two photos on this slide. One is of me. Sometimes on my injured arm, I will wear a wrist splint. Currently, the one I have that I'm showing on the screen has no artwork on it. But I like to say that in 2019, I had what's known as a Frida Kahlo moment, which is where I decided to turn something that I had to wear every day, which is my wrist splint, into a piece of art that I couldn't wait to tell people the story about. So I had this artist draw 9-year-old Tiffany hugging an elephant because I felt like my disability was this elephant in the room. And I also had the artist write the word proud on one of the Velcro straps. And in full transparency, when he wrote that word on my splint, I don't know if I fully felt proud at the time, but as a result of kind of having that word on there, I think I kind of grew into my own disability pride journey. And then the other photo is from our Diversability group at New York City's Disability Pride Parade. I believe this is around 2016 or 2017 timeframe. So now we're just going to go a little bit more into that was a little bit of context on me. Now we're going to go into a little bit of context on the disability community. So as of 2024, our unemployment numbers, there still is a persistent disability employment gap. The employment rate of people with disabilities was 22.7% compared to 65.5% of our non-disabled peers. And part of why I bring that up is knowing that those are our employment numbers means that many of us are turning to entrepreneurship. And here's a quote from Andrew Gurza where they say, disabled people have to become entrepreneurs because capitalism won't give them flexible schedules, work from home, or accommodations that make them feel safe. Here are a few examples of some disabled entrepreneurs that I know, and maybe many of you know. We have Killy Cat Wells from Making Space, formerly from Sea Talent, which was sold to Whaler. Uh, if you are a job seeker, I would highly recommend checking out their platform and some of the courses that they offer. We have Hannah Olson, who runs a company called Disclo, which helps companies with the accommodations process. Then you have Srin Madapali, who ran a company called Accomable, which was essentially like the Airbnb for disabled people. It got bought by Airbnb. You have Alvaro Silberstein of Wheel the World. If you are a wheelchair user who wants to travel, they provide a lot of advice and trips around wheelchair accessible travel. And then you have Deval Patel of Lotus. And full disclosure, I'm an investor in Lotus. And what they do is they have created a wearable ring where, with no apps, no additional technology, it enables you to use that wearable device to turn on and off switches. And I see the Reeve Foundation is putting links to some of those companies in the chat if you would like to check them out. And if you have other disabled entrepreneurs you'd like to add, please add them into the Q&A just so I know about them as well. So I love this. This I originally had seen as an Instagram post from Killy Cat Wells, and I have expanded it because Sir Richard Branson, who to me is one of the most successful disabled entrepreneurs that I know, he's dyslexic and talks a lot about dyslexic thinking. Here are some of the skills of a disabled person: problem solving, delegation, resilience, time management, inherent ability to adapt, creativity, leadership. And voila, those also happen to be the skills of an entrepreneur as well. So many of us have the skills inherently already that we need in order to potentially pursue entrepreneurship. The data is also available out there that we are having a, hold on, let me make myself a little smaller on the screen, that we are having an economic impact. So this is kind of like the business case for disability entrepreneurship. So not only are we 2 times more likely to be self-employed, kind of taking into account that quote from Andrew, where many of us have to become entrepreneurs because traditional employment or a 9 to 5 doesn't accommodate or is not accessible for us. And disability-owned businesses employ disabled people at a rate of 10 times non-disability-owned businesses. So this means, yes, we're starting businesses, and we're also hiring people from within our community and creating more economic opportunity among all of us as well. From some of the data from Disability In, Right now, we know that disability owned businesses have a $32.4 billion economic impact. We believe that the current number of self reported disability owned businesses is underreported. So, if we were to take into account that one in four disabled people, or we have one in four disabled people here in the US, maybe that's the same percentage of the number of small businesses out there. That estimated economic impact could be up to $5 trillion. So now let's move into my favorite part, and maybe all of our favorite part, which is talking about ourselves. I may move through this part a little bit quicker because I saw some of the questions that many of you had, and I want to make sure we do have time for Q&A. But my first business I started when I was a kid. It was called Tiffany Services. This is a flyer. It says working hard just for you. And I had a laundry business where I would charge $5 per load. Oh, sorry, $5 per hour to do your laundry plus 10% tax. And then if you wanted your clothes washed, dried, and folded, it was $7. And it says, please make an appointment 5 minutes in advance. And this arrow here was pointing to my childhood bedroom. And I was hoping that my siblings would be my customers. And then I love this last line down here, which is probably not the best for customer service, but it says, if you're not satisfied, you're not satisfied, which actually is a fact. If you're not satisfied, you're not satisfied. And if any of you had kind of your own version of your own businesses growing up, I would love if you wanted to share them in the chat as well. So that was my first business. I had no customers. But I would say that $7 for washing, drying, and folding clothes is a pretty good deal because now you can outsource those. No, now there are real companies much larger than me doing that who actually do that type of service. But essentially, when I was in college, I kind of took a step back and I realized that our overall well-being is this intersection between our physical health, our mental health, and our social health. And social health to me are having access to community, healthy relationships, social connection. And social health kind of became elevated in consciousness at the start of the pandemic when many of us were at home. And I know many of us in the disability community have experiences with feeling socially isolated and excluded firsthand. And now, with the onset of the pandemic in 2020, many more people realized. So essentially, I really wanted to tackle social isolation in the disability community. So I started what was known as Georgetown University's first ever disability student club. We called ourselves Diversability. You'll see not much has changed since then. Here is an article that we had from 2010. It says conversation picks up for Diversability. And the one thing I just wanted to highlight from here was that we actually got started because we received $500 through something called the Reimagine Georgetown Grant. And this part of the article says, Tiffany Yu put her proposal into action with Diversability, a group with a dual purpose to raise awareness about disability and to reshape people's ideas about disability. The grant was invaluable in the aid it's provided and credits it with my screen is kind of blocking it, credits it with making the group known on campus. So you'll notice not that much has changed from 2010 until 2025. We're still focused on building community, reshaping people's ideas around disability. I will say that we have kind of taken that raising awareness to the next level around elevating pride, because I think you can still be aware of disability and think that our sheer existence is tragic or that we're less than. So we really wanted to center pride. Then I went off to go work in the corporate world. And one of the things I will talk about throughout this presentation is just the importance or the power of a side hustle. So graduated from university, kind of left Diversability there and went to go work in the corporate world. And after a couple of years of being actively involved in Goldman Sachs's Disability Employee Resource Group and pitching the creation and co-founding Bloomberg's Disability Employee Resource Group, it really made me think about, as young professionals, which I was at the time, where do we go as disabled young professionals for community? And it made me realize that if you don't have a big, if you don't have places like the Reeve Foundation, which are great, or you don't have disability employee resource groups at the companies that you're working at, then we're back into this cycle of social isolation. So in the university environment, we had clubs we could be a part of, but then as you move on into your professional career, you don't have, it's a little, you have to be a little bit more intentional about finding community. So I essentially relaunched Diversability as kind of a meetup group, as it was known at the time. And we ended up having some press featured about us. Here's two screenshots from The Guardian and Forbes that are dated around 2015 and 2016. One says childhood tragedy leads to a side hustler's inspiring community project. And another one was me talking, this podcast, which I think is no longer called Two Inboxes, which was for people who had side hustle. So you had your full time inbox and your side hustle inbox. So this was an article about me working full time and what it was like to also work on diversability. And I will say one thing I did like about working full time and starting a side hustle was that um, I'm not sure if that was, I got distracted. I apologize. Uh, was that the work that I was doing full time was in financial services. So it was very analytical work. I was looking at spreadsheets and financial models all day. And then the work we were doing at Diversability, essentially, if you think of a meetup group, you're hosting events, you're getting in community. So I felt like it was a good balance of, during the day, I would be looking at numbers, and then at night, or if you call it your 5 to 9, I would be, meeting up with people and building our community and hosting events. March 3rd, 2017 was a very pivotal day for me. It was the day I got fired. And oftentimes on March 3rd, I will celebrate my I got fired anniversary. And I'm sure some of us here have experiences with getting laid off. But for me, that was my pathway into exploring what it would look like to pursue entrepreneurship full time. So I want to say from the time I was working in the corporate world up until 2017, I was always kind of employed full time. And then since March 3rd, 2017, I've been on this journey of exploring what it would look like to be a full time disabled entrepreneur. Part of what that meant, and I know one of the questions that came in was, has always been around financial sustainability, or where do I find the funds? So when I first started Diversability, I actually did a crowdfunding campaign of just a couple of my friends to say, hey, I'm doing this crowdfunding campaign. It's my birthday month, always a good time to ask people for things. I'm doing this crowdfunding campaign because I would love to just raise a little bit of money so I can incorporate this business and get it off the ground. And I think the crowdfunding campaign raised maybe like $2,500. So $2,500, again, depending on who you are, can go a lot, can go far, or it doesn't go that far. So that also made me realize up until I figured out how to make Diversability work, I needed to find other ways to support myself. So this is a photo of me and Gary Vaynerchuk. Uh, I'm just going to read part of this LinkedIn post, which is, I have so many memories of going to garage sales with my dad as a kid before he passed away when I was 9. One of the best lessons I learned from my dad was to see the value in everything. And I've brought that to how I see and want to build up the disability community. We're valuable simply because we exist. Many years later, in the early days of relaunching Diversability, while it started as a side hustle, I found some creative ways to make some extra money to see if I could make this entrepreneurship thing work. I sold jewelry through a direct sales company. I used Airbnb to rent out my apartment, and I'd flip furniture I got on Craigslist. I had a corner of my apartment with the furniture, and my mom asked me to stop doing that. And then I also just highlight there are risks. These are risks that not everyone can take, acknowledging my own privilege here, which is why once Diversability started making some money, we've reinvested it back into our community. So to talk about some of those side hustles, here is me selling the jewelry. I became a merchandiser, or essentially a sales representative for a company that sold jewelry. And I made it to a point where they featured me in ads. That's me wearing all the jewelry. And I would go and do these little pop-ups, jewelry, just selling the jewelry. I would do the pop-ups. When my friends were getting married, I would reach out to them asking if they had gotten jewelry for their bridesmaids. And right around Mother's Day, I can actually go back and see this. I Facebook messaged every single one of my friends asking if they had gotten a gift for their mom for Mother's Day. Then this is a screenshot of an email I received from Airbnb recertifying me as a superhost. And down here it says, "You're a 15-time superhost, Tiff. Now more than ever, we're so grateful you're an Airbnb host." My current living situation does not allow me to be an Airbnb host, but I was a super host 15 times. That's a lot of times during the time I was living in San Francisco, which at the time was a very popular conference city. So when I knew conferences were coming in, and maybe I was traveling at the time, I would figure out ways. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of these because with the emergence of the gig economy, there are so many ways, even if it's even, and I was still getting Diversability off the ground. There was no way Diversability was only making enough money to cover the cost of our events. So I was finding other creative ways. And I think I kind of want to rebrand and rethink entrepreneurship where like there may be something that you're super passionate about. A lot of advocacy doesn't pay the bills. But maybe there are other things that you are good at that can help support your livelihood. So today, this is kind of what Diversability looks like. We make our money through memberships, events that we're hosting. We have a merch store. Some of you may own our Disability is Not a Bad Word merch. We also get commissions if people decide, we get commissions through, I guess, signing up people up for surveys. And then also we have our nonprofit arm where we get awards and donations. Our team is entirely disabled, run, and led. This is an old screenshot of what our team looked like from a Zoom call. At our largest, I believe we were 10 or 11. We have now downsized a little bit. We're back to 4. And then here's a photo again of Diversability at the New York City Disability Pride Parade. It probably wasn't until 2020 that Diversability started to hit its stride a little bit. We started to get clear about what our offering was and who we served. And keep in mind, I started Diversability in 2009. So from 2009 up until 2020, we were still figuring things out. And I think as the same way that language evolves, I think businesses can evolve as well. But I screenshotted this because these are the communities that were selected to receive additional funding. And my photo is right here. We ended up winning something called Demo Day. And as a part of being part of Meta's Community Accelerator program, we received a grant of over $50,000 to invest in our business. And we used that to really think through our membership community, how we were going to use that to create a sustainable business that could help support us and our team. In addition to that, last year, we ended up winning the grand prize of something called the Barclays Small Business Big Wins Promotion. And out of 4,500 small businesses, we won the nationwide competition to secure the $60,000 grand prize. And we used that $60,000 to develop a self-paced video course on disability inclusion that is geared toward employers and organizations and allies. And one thing that was interesting about us just entering this was that we were told that the only way we were going to win was if we got press. And one of the things I've learned just being in the disability space is that unless our stories are tragedy tropes or superhero tropes and nothing just showcasing in between, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to get press. But I really leaned on the power of community. And I think because of that, we were able to win. And for me personally, I ended up expanding my offering. So I no longer do the Airbnb. I'm no longer doing Craigslist, although sometimes I still get a little jolt of excitement of upcycling things. going to garage sales and finding little steals. But I started creating on social media, doing a lot more speaking, and then because of my social media, ended up getting a book deal and being able to offer that as part of my suite as well. And so here's just a couple of press about kind of the success that I have found. So one says, one is an article from Buffer. It says, TikTok has landed me $160,000 in brand partnerships and a six-figure book deal. Here's how I did it. And then, not as much talking about the money side of things, but my social media has gotten me featured in Women's Health and a couple other places as well. And then one other thing that I want to highlight that is actually accessible to many of you, and I think someone in the comments ahead of this shared that they take a lot of surveys as well. This is a screenshot from a LinkedIn post from 3 years ago, or from 2021 or 2022, I want to say. And the headline of it says, I've made more than $4,500 from completing surveys this year. And I know that many of us, sometimes we get like patient advocacy surveys or to be part of different research that's going on. The photo on here is I ended up taking 50 surveys through this one survey company. But essentially, it says, I get a lot of emails for surveys, so I ignored them. But starting in January of 2022, I completed my first survey. The one thing that was interesting about Gauge was that I could include my response via video, record audio, or type out that answer, which made it a lot easier and accessible for me to do the surveys. And I've gotten paid from $10 to $800 to fill out these surveys. A $10 survey would probably take you, 5 or 10 minutes. Those $800 ones might be a little bit more involved, may ask you to watch something and provide feedback, or maybe a multi-part survey. And then I said, while this post isn't necessarily to recruit folks to the platform, though if you're interested, I'll include my link below. I just want to highlight another way you can diversify your income. So all of that said, now probably to the more interesting part of the presentation. Let me just do a quick look at the Q&A here. Okay, and maybe I will look at the Q&A at the end, but thank you for all the questions in here. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about you. And oh, I apologize for the formatting in advance. But one of the things I realized about kind of having so many multiple streams of income is that essentially what I've done is I've built what's known as a portfolio career. And a portfolio career says you're monetizing your skills in many ways with multiple income sources. It doesn't just have to come from one place. So this is adapted from a site called the Portfolio Collective. And essentially, there's a column on here that says traditional work, and then arrows over to what it looks like for portfolio work. So with traditional work, you have your one main job. With portfolio work, you have multiple sources of income. Traditional work, you're working for someone else. Portfolio work, you're working for yourself. So sometimes I feel like I'm like a chronic 1099. That's the form that you get as an independent contractor. Traditional work, you're office-based. Portfolio work, you're remote. So as I mentioned in my visual description at the beginning, I'm joining you from a hotel in Pennsylvania. And I have this little, hold on, let me see. I have a little travel light that I bring so that if I need to do speaking engagements, I can do them on the road. And then with traditional work, your job responsibilities are very defined. Sometimes it can feel a little bit repetitive. While with portfolio work, every day is different. So today I might be giving a talk. Another day we might be doing something with diversability. Another day I might be recording some content, etc. So as we start to think more about you, here is kind of the guideline of first figuring out what your strengths are. And then step 2, thinking about what your niche is going to be. And then finally, the steps to getting started. So with identifying your strengths, and I'm going to sneak ahead to this, to Ikigai, but essentially with identifying your strengths, here are some questions for reflection. What am I good at? Examples could be creativity, problem solving. You could even refer back to the slide I shared earlier about the skills of a disabled person, the skills of an entrepreneur. Then the second question, what do I love? Do you love writing, speaking, designing things, building, coaching? Even for someone like me, like I find it very easy to speak, but I find writing a little bit harder. And then finally, what problem can I solve? Is there a service, tool, or platform you wish existed? Can you create something that benefits both disabled and non-disabled people? And even if it's a very specific audience of maybe just disabled people, that's fine too, just making sure that there's a market there. So even if I think about when I was starting Diversability, for me, it was I know a lot of disabled people, or at least in my own experience, I didn't have access to community growing up. How can we make it easier for disabled people to find each other? Because I believe that by finding each other, we can realize, not we can build self-confidence, we can find our voice, we can support each other. So 3 reflection questions for you, maybe screenshotable slide if you would like to do that. But essentially, those questions are known as ikigai, which are essentially, is there a way you can figure out what you love, figure out what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for? So the intersection of those 4 things is ikigai. And if you're only able to accomplish like 2 of those things, you'll see if you do what you love and you're doing what the world needs, but you're not paid for it, then you're pursuing your mission. If you're doing what the world needs and what you can be paid for, but it's not what you love doing, that's just a vocation. If you're doing what you're good at and what you can be paid for, but maybe you don't love it, then that's just a profession. And if you're doing what you love and what you're good at, but you're not being paid for it, and maybe the world doesn't need it, then it's just a passion, right? So how can you find that intersection of those 4 things? Then as we move to finding your niche, the first is kind of thinking about, okay, what type of business do I want to start? Now, I want to share that in this part of this presentation, this is more about starting your own business. If you want to have that portfolio career and kind of lean into the gig economy, maybe you don't need to go out and start your own fully fledged business, right? So I just want to make that distinction. So type of business, do you want it to be service-based, something more like freelancing or coaching or consulting? Or do you want it to be product-based, like you can actually hold a book? Um, and that can be adaptive clothing or accessible beauty products. I know a lot of people are really excited about this company, this beauty company called Tilt Beauty, which I own their accessible mascara, and it passes the one hand test, which is the Tiffany test. But she had actually ended up designing that product, I think, because of her own experiences with arthritis and the way that a lot of these beauty tools are very thin. And if you have dexterity related disabilities, it makes it difficult. So actually, one thing I am excited for Tilt Beauty to maybe do is an eyeliner, because right now the eyeliner I have, every single time I take the cap off, the entire like liner part just comes off with the cap too. So does not pass the one hand test. Or you can pursue digital entrepreneurship. So right now we're seeing kind of like an explosion of disabled content creators who, one thing I love about the disabled content creators is that we're not leaning into these tragedy or superhero tropes. We're just showcasing how extraordinarily ordinary our lives are. And you can actually be paid for that. So if you decide to pursue something like YouTube, there's something you can get ad revenue, or you can do brand partnerships. Or if you want to move more toward a mission-driven business, you could start the type of business that has social impacts. Though I may argue that many disability-owned businesses, no matter what their business model is, has some level of social impact, and I'll talk about that a little later. And then once you have figured out what type of business you want to start, then you start to think about who's going to be your customer. Is it disabled people? Is it non-disabled people? Uh, Disabled people's friends and families? Or do you want to sell into businesses and governments where at least that's known as B2B, business to business? And on that level, maybe the contracts are a little bit bigger or they're buying in bulk, right? So then finally, getting started, I'm a big fan of the side hustle. I know that not everyone has that privilege, especially if your current work is extremely demanding. but I find that side hustles are a really great way to pilot if there is a market for your idea. So interestingly enough, when we first started hosting these meetups at Diversability, I ended up getting an email from the New York Public Library, which for a couple of our Diversability meetups had donated their space. They had reached out because they saw that we were building community and they said, "Hey, do you think that we could hire you to curate a couple of speakers who have different types of disabilities so that we can learn more about their library experience?" And so all of a sudden, we had created a market that I didn't really know that we had because we had a large community of people with different types of disabilities. And maybe some people want to hear from Tiffany, who can only use one arm, or maybe people want a different perspective. Maybe people want to hear from people who were born with their disabilities or people who are wheelchair users. So, because now we had created that community, we not only have the New York Public Library, but a lot of others start to come to us to say, "Hey, we're hosting this event. Do you think you could help us curate some speakers?" So start the side hustle, do a small test run to see if there is a market for your ideas. Share your idea with potential customers. I did see one question come in advance around people stealing your ideas. I personally believe that I can give someone this entire slide deck and they can present it, but it will be different the way they present it. So I still believe that you are your greatest competitive advantage. Um, and then if you kind of want to get started doing more digital entrepreneurship, start to build your audience. Here are a couple community and resources that are entrepreneurial minded. Together International is one I really like. They run accelerators for disabled entrepreneurs and disability tech. Then there is Remarkable, which is more focused on disability tech. And they provide an infusion of capital if you get into their accelerator program. I believe Together International does as well, or at least there's a pitch deck at the end where you can pitch and get and potentially win some money. Then there's Synergy's Work, and Synergy's Work runs a community that you can go join specifically for disabled entrepreneurs. Then, of course, not of course, then there is the Disability Owned certification. I personally am not disability owned, but I have heard that if you do get your disability owned certification, you have access to all of the suite of partners that Disability In has, which is very vast. They do a lot of work on disability in business. And then finally, if you are in the San Francisco area, there is something known as the San Francisco Disability Business Alliance. And I believe it's still open right now, but they are doing a call for disability owned businesses to potentially win $1,000 to kickstart your San Francisco based disability owned business. If you do happen to be on disability benefits, I know that was a question that came in a lot as well. Here are a couple of resources available. The first is the Social Security Administration's plan to achieve self-support, also known as PASS, and then ABLE accounts. So this enables you to have a savings account available, I believe of up to $100,000 that do not impact your disability benefits. And then more recently, I learned that the Reeve Foundation also has these information specialists. Kelly has gone ahead and put that link into the chat. And if you're watching the recording of this, you can go online and search for that as well. And that's a great way to get more personalized support to figure out how they can best support you. So then finally, as I close, and I know tons of questions kind of coming into the Q&A, for me, I do think about the why of why I keep going. And part of the reason why I love doing the work I do specifically is getting to see our community do really amazing things. The definition I use of community is a group of people who come together to support your own growth and each other's growth. And so not only have I feel like I've grown a lot in the last 15 years, it has been so exciting for me to meet someone through one of our Diversability events from 10 years ago. And now they have books coming out and I can support their book launch. And I just love being able to cheer other people on in our community. It kind of reminds me of that metaphor of like the rising tide lifts all boats. So I just believe that a win for one of us is a win for all of us. And so, we have won some grants at Diversability, and I hope that the next year there are more people who win those grants. And one actually specific example of that is we received something called, or I received something called the Shorty. It was called the Elevate Creatives Fund. And I had applied to it, and my creative project at the time was working on my book and thinking through the launch of it. And with the funding that I received from the book, I used that to pay contributors who shared their stories with us. I paid a disabled designer to design the anti-ableist manifesto art. I hired a disabled editor to help me finalize the draft of the manuscript. And so those are just some ways that you can also think about ways that you can support your own community as well. But I'm going to show this again because I want to make sure that yes, we would love to support our community, but I want to make sure that you are taken care of first. So that's kind of the most important thing. And then the next circle outside of that is your family or your chosen family, making sure you're taking care of them. And then if there is additional capacity, broadening that out to supporting the broader community as well. Here are some of the ripple effects that I see of disability entrepreneurship. I know I mentioned that stat earlier of the ways that we hire disabled people into our businesses 10 times at the rate of non-disability owned businesses. So we're creating employment opportunities. We're shifting perceptions of disability and who gets to be an entrepreneur. We are creating innovations that end up benefiting much broader than the disability community. We think back to examples of audiobooks or the potato peeler or electric toothbrushes, which are all examples of innovation that was designed by, for, and with the disability community that people who are non-disabled also benefit from as well. And then finally, you create a meaningful impact within your communities. And then even as we think about how we are building our businesses, I think community is so important. Community is not only your customers or the audience that you're building, it's having that peer level support and mentorship. That's why I shared those resources of Together International and Synergy's work, because having a community of other disabled entrepreneurs, you can go and workshop things together or talk through different things. And then building that community also enables you to work on partnerships together. So Diversability and Making Space, if you are in the LA area on October 12th, we are partnering together to host an event that brings together Diversability's community, disabled professional, job seekers. Making Space is a talent platform for job seekers to help close the disability employment gap, to kind of come together. So are there ways that we can combine our audiences together or cross-pollinate so that we can make a bigger impact within the community? So here are some of the ways that my own work as an entrepreneur has supported my community, our broader disability community. I personally run a micro grant, not personally, I co-founded a micro grant for disability projects called the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter. And I will say, actually, maybe I will go ahead and put the link in here. But similar to the way that Diversability started, here, hold on one second. I'm like, I can't type and talk at the same time. But similar to the way that Diversability started with a $500 grant, I believe that many disability projects and initiatives could use a cash infusion of $1,000. And depending on who you are, $1,000 goes a long way or a little way. And as we think about how we distribute the grants at the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, we do think about if receiving $1,000 will really make a dent. And I would also invite all of you, if any of you have an idea or a project that you're working on, to go ahead and apply. It is pretty competitive. We have received 12,000 submissions over the 8 years that we've been around. And that comes out to about 120 submissions for one grant per month. But don't be discouraged because every single month is a new month. I also started an endowment fund at my university. And essentially, the way an endowment fund works is you fundraise an amount in the beginning, and a small percentage, maybe 2 to 5%, gets distributed every year. And the other 95% gets invested in the market. And based on market returns of 8%, the fund will continue to grow. And even in the first year, if you raise $100,000 in that first year, even if it was 5K that first year, which doesn't seem that much depending on who you are, it will continue to grow over time. Maybe slowly, but it will continue to grow and will exist forever. And then finally, I've started doing a little bit of angel investing and becoming a limited partner in some venture capital funds, which essentially just means we're investing in startups or different companies that have the ability to scale. And I have two disability-owned companies in my portfolio, which is very exciting, and hopefully more. But also becoming an entrepreneur has helped me figure out ways that I want to get more civically engaged as well. So as I mentioned in my intro, I was previously on the San Francisco Mayor's Disability Council. I currently serve, or I'm just finishing up my term on the LA 28 Games Local Hire and Workforce Development Working Group. And then for the past year or so, I have served on the NIH National Advisory Board on Medical Rehabilitation Research. So then if we look at kind of what the Tiffany ecosystem looks like overall, these first two columns, I kind of are my portfolio career, focusing on community and education. And then the last two are kind of what I had showed on the slide before of then taking my portfolio career here and turning it into impact for our community. So with that, I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, but I always love to close by encouraging all of you to take some action, even if the action is to take that Ikigai Venn diagram and write down, reflect on what are the things you love doing, what are the things you're good at, what are you getting paid for, what does the world need? So I just included a couple ideas here of identifying a business idea or side hustle you want to explore, connecting with one other disabled entrepreneur. I see a notification for 20 comments in the Q&A right now. So maybe there are ways you can connect with each other there. Do some research on a funding or mentorship resource. Check out the Reeve Foundation Information Specialists. I mentioned the Awesome Foundation is awarding $1,000 every month. If you're in San Francisco, check out the Disability Business Alliance. And then a final idea to share what you learned with your community. And so with that, that's all I got. Feel free to tag me if you decide to share anything on social media. Those were some extra photos. I'm going to stop sharing my slide, and I am curious if someone from the Reeve Foundation would like to help curate the Q&A, or I can also take a look.
Yes, I am happy to read out some of these questions, Tiffany. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Okay, so let's start with this one. This is from Kat Contillo. For
Yeah,
those
Kat
of
has a lot of really good questions.
She does, or they do. Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know your pronouns. Okay, what's your process for turning creative ideas into viable products or services?
I am a big fan of, in San Francisco terms, we call it product market fit. So, so essentially it says, okay, you have an idea, but are people willing to show up? So I will share that literally for every idea I've had, I have done a micro campaign of sorts around it. So rewind back to 2015, I was thinking of relaunching Diversability as a meetup, but I didn't know, hadn't built out my disability community at that time. My disability community was still at Georgetown. So I didn't know a lot of disabled people in New York. And what I did was I said, I'm just going to host one event. And if anyone shows up, then that means that we are serving a need. So there are so many tools now like Eventbrite, Luma, Partyful. I mean, tons of event platforms where you can literally just go and organize one event. And so people showed up. Actually, 70 people showed up. We sold out. And we also had the former commissioner from the New York City Mayor's Office on People with Disabilities there. And after that event, so many people came up to me and they said, "When's the next event?" But I hadn't even thought that far, right? I said, let me just host one event and see if anyone shows up. One other idea we had was the launch of our merch store. So I know a lot of people have creative ideas, and we had some ideas for things we wanted to put on a shirt. And I can't remember what platform it was. I think it was Custom Ink. There are a couple t-shirt companies where you have to sell a certain number of t-shirts for them to go into production. So we ended up piloting our Disability is Not a Bad Word design. We had to do the campaign 3 times because every single time people got shipped their shirts, people wanted them. So then what we realized, and our merch store is hosted on a site called Threadless, which is print on demand. So what that means is that we can put the designs on, but we're not holding a bunch of inventory. We're saying only if someone buys this design will Threadless then print it. Pros and cons to doing the small batches or the print on demand, which means we make less money for every person that buys a shirt, but it also means that we don't have to hold inventory. So those are like two mini ideas for turning your creative ideas into products or services. I like the idea of having a wait list as well if you are looking to launch something potentially digitally, but you're not sure, again, if there's an audience there. I even think about book launches, and sometimes people or everyone is pushing the pre-orders, right? Because they want to know what the demand is going to be for the book. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. But if you have something more specific, I'm happy to workshop it as well.
Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you, Kat, for such a great question. Um, this one is from Stephen Graham. Is Diversability LLC a nonprofit? If so, what were the considerations for you when deciding whether the organization would be a nonprofit or for profit?
Yes, so we are hybrid, which means that we have for profit and we also have a nonprofit arm. So one of the things I'll share, or I guess I'll share something and then I'll share a resource, is when I was first thinking about launching Diversability, I got so caught up in figuring out how to structure it. If you do decide you want to create a nonprofit, there's a lot of paperwork and it does take a good period of time for you to receive your 501c3 designation, which means that you can accept donations. So we started as a for-profit, just as an LLC, as you mentioned in the question. And there are very low barriers to entry, I want to say, for incorporating. And essentially, when we started doing that, we were more structured as an events business. Where our nonprofit side has come in is more around scholarships, being able to offer our events on a sliding scale or our memberships on a sliding scale so that we can make what we're offering more accessible to a broader group of people. Our nonprofit arm is fiscally sponsored, which means that we have a nonprofit who has a 501c3 designation, able to accept the donations on our behalf. They take a processing fee, which is how the fiscal sponsor is able to support itself. Um, and so that's how we decided that. But I think it comes down to it could even be a personal decision. I'm seeing a lot of nonprofits now, and these nonprofits actually make me very excited. There are a lot of nonprofits now that have earned revenue, which essentially means, and I'll share actually a more concrete example of this. So one is an after-school program that teaches at-risk youth how to repair bicycles. And then they have a bike shop that sells the repaired bicycles. And that is kind of like the earned revenue part of the nonprofit, which I think is pretty cool. Which means that the nonprofit, and I want to say probably about 40% of their revenue comes from the bike shop. Uh, but having an earned revenue arm, no matter how you decide to structure your business, means that you don't have to go out over and over again to apply for grants, to go and fundraise. And so, even for us, not only as a business, but even as we think about being this hybrid business, hybrid for profit, nonprofit, we have had to make the transition over the last couple of years to think about how we can create more sustainable income as a business so that we're not entirely reliant on donations and grants, because depending on the year, you might not get that grant. Depending on what the environment, the external environment is, maybe the economy is not in a great place and people don't have as much disposable income. So I think having some level of, I've always been a big fan of hybrid, but we are essentially what's known as a social enterprise, which means that we're kind of like a mission-based business that has a for-profit and has a nonprofit arm.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. We're all learning things today. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
I do also want to make sure that I name and this is from an anonymous attendee. So able counts actually are open to all disabled people. So you don't just have to be on disability benefits. And that was actually something I learned more recently. And I will share full transparency that I do not have an able account. But this could also be a great place to connect with the Reeve Foundation's information specialists to see what might be available to you depending on, whatever your situation is.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. We had an attendee ask, where can we get a copy of this presentation? And the recording of this webinar will be on the Reeve Foundation's YouTube, and all attendees will receive a follow-up email with a link to that YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access it there. One last question, Tiffany, very quickly. We have from an attendee, are there any job sites or boards that center disability professionals?
I mean, the short answer is making space. Definitely go check it out. You can sign up as a job seeker. And if you are someone who is currently job seeking, they also host a monthly like employment support group as well via Zoom. So that comes to mind. I'm not sure if Chronically Capable is still around, but there's also one called Inclusively, which also has a community component to it as well. Uh, those are ones to check out. And I will close by saying at Diversability, we also have a Facebook group. It's not specifically focused on entrepreneurship or jobs, but I like to think of us as like the town square, where if you're just curious about like what's going on in the disability world, what people are talking about, news, resources, support, that could be just a good broader community to join as well. But one of the things I like to say is that whether Diversability or the Reeve Foundation are the communities for you, even if we're not, totally fine. I just hope that you have community and a support system, no matter where you are and no matter how you're finding it.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you to our closed captioner, to our ASL interpreters. And again, thank you to Tiffany for sharing all of this wisdom with everyone. Please remember to take the survey that will pop up on your screen when we finish the webinar. That will give us important information as we continue to provide educational resources to the paralysis community. All right, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.